Oh, good morning, Lillian, and good morning, all of you who join us for Caring Conversations. We are so glad to be with you again for this time together. So, Pastor Lillian, you have brought us something very meaningful today. I'd love to just invite you to dive right in.
Thank you, Pastor Susan. Well, for some of you, you may have known that this past week, I spent a few days at a pastor's retreat. And one thing that I appreciated so much from my time away was the gift and the value of silence. So I wanted to talk to you all about silence and the spiritual discipline of silence. Because as I was experiencing silence, I realized, well, it's not just a void of noise. Because truth be told, like, when can we ever get away from complete noise?
Right.
I mean, even when you're going for a walk, you still hear the rustling of the leaves or, your footsteps. So it's not a void or lack of noise. And I mean, that's part of it. But I was reflecting on this definition of silence by Richard Foster.
Yeah.
Richard Foster says, silence creates in us an open, empty space where we are enabled to become attentive to God. And how we need such open spaces in our modern techno world. Indeed, many people today have become little more than walking towers of Babel.
Hmm.
And I just want to stop there because I think that image of us being walking towers of Babel is so profound. So I thought maybe we could unpack that. How are we walking towers of Babel? Do you see any of that in your life, Susan?
I certainly do. I've noticed actually in the last week or so, it's harder to sit very still. My mind is always running. I'm wondering if that's one way he's thinking of that. There's just always something going along in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of pings from one thing to another to another.
Yeah. Yes, I've experienced that too, where my mind is filled with thoughts.
Yeah.
And then I also tried to think, when was the last time I was in the car and I chose not to turn on the radio or chose not to listen to a podcast or just sat in bed rather than have my phone with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was also, yes, the mind chatter as well as external choices that I make that invite chatter into my space.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyhow, I mean, so I was thinking about that, and I'm going to keep reading from Richard Foster. He says, silence puts a stopper on all this mindless chatter and clatter. And it allows God to create in us attitudes and habits that will hold us constantly in the loving presence of God.
Hmm.
So we are not used to silence. In fact, as I say that, I think about conversations I have all the time where people admit, and I mean, I admit as well, that awkward silence, like the lull in a conversation, we are all familiar with it. We could be engaging and then all of a sudden there's silence. And then on Zoom, even more so, because there's sometimes a delay with the audio.
Yes.
And we feel like, should I be saying something? And then our mind starts to chatter.
Yes.
But I think my invitation for us all is to transform those moments of silence into opportunities to become more attentive to God. I think especially for some of us who live alone during this pandemic, silence, like physical silence, was deafening.
Yes.
And so again, my challenge for people who are in those situations, if you live alone or you feel like silence is deafening, my challenge is to turn that silence, that physical void of noise, into an invitation to draw closer to God.
Yeah.
And
Lillian,
then,
there's two
oh,
things you
go
were
ahead.
saying that I think are so powerful. Oh, look at that. That was a little technological glitch
Yeah.
where we lost you a little bit. But when it was invitation, and I heard that there was two ways of inviting. You mentioned, sitting in your bed, maybe with your phone or turning on the podcast in the car, always inviting another distraction or chatter inside. And that just made me think in another way of, oh, I'm inviting that in. It just isn't there. I'm purposefully doing that. And maybe that would be worth a question of why. And then the other was the invitation of that to allow God to hold us constantly in the loving presence of God. And there's a profound difference, right? To be in a loving presence versus an isolating, stifling presence,
Yeah.
or a really judgmental presence.
Yes, thank you. I think that's right. That's along the same lines, is that we are invited into space where God meets us.
Yes.
It's not judgmental, or it's not condemning, but it's a place where we can go in silence to be in God's presence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so whether you're living alone, or you have a full house, or there's someone or a beloved pet who's always right by you
Yeah.
creating noise, I do want to also challenge and invite um, those people, those of us, to maybe carve out, to choose silence. Do what you have to do to choose moments of silence where you can be in the presence of the loving arms of God. So, get a pair of earplugs, or go lock yourself in the car, or, I've heard people go into their bathtubs, and just lock the door. And not to experience silence for the sake of silence. I think I want to be clear about that. It's not to seek out silence for the sake of silence, but it's choosing moments of silence with the intention of being in God's presence.
Yes.
Um,
I want to say that again, what you invited us to, because many of us do, live alone. I have an older child, and so I have plenty of time often where I'm on my own. But that difference of turning a solitude, and maybe I don't want to use that word, but an aloneness into a, Lord, I'm ready, available. I want to be in your presence.
yeah.
In your
And,
presence.
and as you described that, I felt like, goodness, I don't even know how to do that. Like, how many of us really are able to be silent before the Lord? I think it is a practice that we've lost. And so again, this is why I bring this invitation. Let's practice it. Let's 5 minutes, 10 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
Experiment with it. Do it for 3 weeks and see how it feels. But biblically, Christ often would go off to a quiet place. And I wish it would tell us, like, what did Jesus do exactly during that time? Right? Because then we could have a manual. But no, it's just that he retreated to a quiet place. And then also the scripture passage that comes to mind, John 15, abide in me as I abide in the Father. I think that in our moments of silence, when we choose to be in the presence of God in silence, that could be a way that we practice abiding in him.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a wise word. abide in me. Versus, I mean, like strive, try hard, hustle, panic, worry. Abide in me.
Mhm.
Abide in me.
Yeah. Or even talk. Like, like we don't have to talk. Just
Yeah, right.
abide. Just
Abide.
abide. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Lillian, for inviting us to these invitations to silence and into a loving presence with God. Friends, as you're listening along, I hope you sense the presence of the Lord with you, for God surely is. And we'd love to hear how your times of silence are, and give it a go. Blessing to you this day, and we'll see you next time.